There it is.
Right. So for my transcription project, I did Milton's Commonplace book, and I'm Avery Hill. That's me. So this is John Milton. He was a poet and public intellectual, best known for his writing the great epic English poem Paradise Lost. And he he was best known for his poetry, so not just Paradise Lost, but also sonnets, different things like that. But also, he took a break from writing poetry in the middle of his life to engage in public activism, especially during the English Civil War, which resulted in the execution of King Charles I. Also, there's a regicide. This is really a battle between the king and Parliament. There was a lot of different factions. I'm pretty sure John Milton was seemed like a radical during this time, is when he wrote like his divorce tracts and things like that. And so he really left writing poetry. I compared it to writing with his left hand. So he really was very involved in this political lifestyle because he said it called him. Like he didn't really have a choice. He was kind of forced into it because he was writing in one of the most politically unstable periods in English history. So he went blind in the middle of his life and completed Paradise Lost by dictating to a scribe and having them read the lines back to him. So in the middle of the night, his muse, which is the Holy Spirit, he said would come to him and give him the lines, and he would wake up and yell for somebody to come write his stuff down. And they say he called it milking him, so he would kind of bring out the poetry, which is a very weird metaphor. And then my favorite Milton quote: "The mind is a place of its own, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven." So that's from the first book of Paradise Lost. That's Lucifer speaking, or Satan. So commonplace books, they're typically ways of cataloging information that were used for centuries. From the Enlightenment, the founding fathers used commonplace books. A lot of the founding fathers actually used Milton in their commonplace books. And these books are typically divided into sections such as freedom, power, gender, things like that. And they would copy quotes from different sources, and then write stories, recipes, ideas. They would write down, concepts they had. All in all, I said commonplace books were equivalent to the pre-modern Google Cloud, where various types of information from different sources could be organized for later use. And so, essentially the thought is like on a cloud where you're taking all this information to get used later. The commonplace book is a way of cataloging this different information into sections for when you're writing. Say you're writing a tract on freedom, you can go back and see all of the quotes that you liked about freedom in the past, or disagreed with, or whatever. So Milton's Commonplace book, this page, I was taken from Milton's Commonplace book, and it was an early sketch of what would become the epic poem Paradise Lost. But at this point, he was still planning on writing a tragedy. And he wrote many different characters and stories about which he was considering writing. And so it's important to note that although he had planned on writing this great epic poem for his entire life, he actually wrote to his father, I think it was his father, saying that he was going to write this great epic poem, that he didn't do it until later in his life because of the English Civil War, and he was kind of forced into writing about politics instead of being able to write poetry. Most people aren't reading, aren't reading epic poems and publishing epic poems during a civil war. Did I skip a page? I think I skipped a page. Nope. So this first section in the top left-hand corner, this is all marked out. So he wrote this down and then marked it out. So Michael Chorus, and again, he was writing a tragedy, and so it kind of makes sense to have a chorus. You think like Greek tragedies such as Antigone, where the chorus represents the people, and they're supposed to speak out to the king and tell him, "You're being crazy. Don't execute Antigone." But he ends up doing it anyways. Well, I guess Henry V is not really a good example, but yes, you think like in a tragedy, that's what choruses are usually doing. So Lucifer, Adam, Eve, conscience, death, and then also labor, sickness, discomfort, honor it with others, It also means mutes, and so I don't know exactly what that means, but I think it means that they're mute. I guess they don't speak. So either they're just like themes, or they're actual characters who can't speak. I'm not really sure. And then faith, hope, charity. And again, this is all marked out. And then he went to start. You see, he started writing in the middle of the page. So in the middle column right here, you can see after tragedies. I think it said after. Or maybe it said other. I was kind of confused on that. Adam's banishment, the flood, Abraham in Egypt. And so these are very, like, these, tragedy is characterized as, mainly as people learning their lesson too late. It's like, think like Antigone, you know, like, speaking truth to power. And then also, like, listening to the gods. And you can think of, like, King Lear, he shouldn't have sent his daughter away to France. That was the only one that really loved him, you know? And so, you can think of these tragedies, people learning too late. And so Adam, it makes perfect sense, you know, like, as you're walking out of paradise, you're like, I really shouldn't have eaten that fruit. But you already did, and so you can't really take it back. You already know the knowledge of good and evil. The flood, God punishing humans for their misfortunes. And you could probably think, like, as the world is flooding, you're like, oh, I probably should have been a better person. Abraham, I'm not really sure. And also, he mentions Moses down here. Moses is another good example of something that could be a tragedy, because although he led his people out of Egypt, he never got to see the promised land. So he was in the desert. We never actually get to see the promised land. So, and then this right column over here has Michael, Moses, justice, mercy. They're all together. Heavenly love, the evening star Hesperus, which I looked up and I think it's Venus. Chorus of angels. Again, he's thinking about tragedy. So maybe this could factor into the other chorus. I don't know. Lucifer, Adam, Eve, conscience, death. And labor, sickness, discontent, ignorance, fear, and death are all mutes again. Faith, hope, charity. So these are kind of ideas and the people he's thinking about, which a lot of them are themes that are still present in Paradise Lost. And so then under that it says the persons. Oh, I think I just realized. No, it says the persons. It could say the lessons. I actually just realized that. That could be an L. And that could be the page underneath it that's bleeding through. Yeah, I think it's the lessons. Anyways, considering how he assigned his true body, that it corrupts maybe it's corrupts not because of his wife. So he's saying Adam's body is not corrupted because of Eve. I could read that. Declares the life of Enoch and Elijah beside the purity. So it's another biblical story that he's bringing into it. That like pure minds, dews and clouds preserve if the corruption wins. Like, and that whole line is incohesive. I couldn't really read it. And then Adam and then innocence and sin. So really corruption versus innocence, and then the theme of sin and also kind of responsibility, I guess, in the garden. So why is Adam falling? Because Eve is the one that kind of told him to do it. And so like, these kind of the lessons, like how to preserve that purity, like why they lost paradise, and it's because of sin. And so you can kind of see him already thinking about the lessons that even though Paradise Lost isn't a tragedy, it's still kind of learning these. You can still kind of learn these lessons too late, you know. And so yeah, it's you kind of see these themes already. And over here he says Paradise Lost. I don't know if this is the first time he uses this, but he mentions the words Paradise Lost. And so I think earlier, you said in class that earlier names were like Adam Unthroned or something like that. And so like this is I thought it was pretty cool that Paradise Lost is used here. He says Moses. I could not decipher that word, but again, so it's Moses, and then justice, and then mercy and wisdom, debating what should become of man if he fall. And so, this is also interesting too, because in Paradise Lost you see the concept of like the scale, and justice, and kind of the patriarchal stern father, a lot, and it's usually justice and then the son is mercy. not wisdom. So it's interesting that wisdom is juxtaposed with mercy. And in the chorus of angels sing, this is kind of Act 1. Act 2, heavenly love, evening star, the marriage song and the scribe. In Act 3, Lucifer confusing Adam. So it's not until Act 3 that Lucifer appears in the garden to confuse Adam. And it's interesting that he says Adam and not confuses Eve. It's also interesting that Book 3 the argument begins, God sitting on his throne. And so a lot of people argue that Lucifer is kind of the star of Paradise Lost. I mean, it starts with him chained to the floor of hell. But it's interesting to see that he actually doesn't appear till Book 3 like God does in the final form of Paradise Lost. And the chorus fears for Adam and declares something, rebellion. So this chorus is like telling him, or at least telling the audience, this is like something bad is happening. He is messing up. So you can kind of see this lesson being learned too late. For Adam fallen and then Eve. And this is the first mention of Eve. And then conscience or confidence, I couldn't really tell, it was kind of blotchy, cites them to God's examination. So this, whichever one it is, puts him before God, as opposed to the biblical story where God shows up and is like, where are you guys? And they say, oh, we are naked, we couldn't come before you. And he's like, oh, who told you that? So as opposed to being set before God, as opposed to God showing up and kind of interrupting their panic, they're put before God, so for his examination. I thought that was interesting. And then the rest is completely incomprehensible. It's the other page is bleeding through, so I really don't know what they're saying. I actually fixed that to incomprehensible, but didn't. So at first it seemed like this is just scattered writing on parchment that's just all over the place. Then upon closer examination, you see that this is kind of a glimpse into the mind of one of the English language's greatest poets. And it illustrates how he came to arrive at the epic poem and the importance of the Commonplace book for that to happen in his creative process. And so it kind of reminds me of sitting on a Saturday night in the library, and I'm like, I have a project, an exam due. I have an exam or whatever due in 3 days. I'm just not ready. And kind of that creative process for maybe like writing an essay. Crazy to think that this 10,000 line epic came from this scattered, crazy, incomprehensible. We can kind of comprehend it a little bit, but kind of like just scattered list of characters and themes and lessons. Like you see right here. So I thought that, I don't know, it's pretty cool. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed.